Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Big Blue Sports here on WCVF 88.9, the campus and community voice of Fredonia. So, it is an eventful day in Buffalo sports. The trade winds are blowing with some rather fierce energy, and I figured that would just involve the Sabres because the NHL trade deadline is tomorrow at 4 p.m. And of course, as seems to be a common theme with happening not only on this show, but happening in general, the Bills cannot allow the Sabres to be in the spotlight by themselves for like 5 seconds. The Bills have to make sure that they can always overshadow the Sabres. Of course, there was a report coming out with the NHL trade deadline being tomorrow. The Sabres were reportedly in talks with the St. Louis Blues to acquire defenseman Colton Parayko. Parayko, 32 years old, a big right-hand shot defenseman, played top minutes for Canada in the Olympics this year and the Four Nations face-off last year, too. A veteran defenseman, very good defensive shutdown guy. And St. Louis has had a really, really rough season this year. But the issue, the holdup has been that Colton Parayko has a no-trade clause in his contract. So in order for this trade to go through, Parayko has to waive that no-trade clause. Now, the discussion for what will be going to St. Louis in return, it looks like the deal is something like the Sabres trading defensive prospect Radim Murtka, who was the 9th overall pick of last year's draft, as well as their first-round pick in this year's draft, to the Blues for Parayko. There was a report that supposedly the Sabres were also trying to get a guy who I would say is the top prize of the trade deadline if he gets traded, Blues star forward Robert Thomas. The conversation was potentially Sabres GM Jarmo Kekalainen was trying to get both Thomas and Parayko from St. Louis. The holdup on that deal, and again, these are all rumors, supposedly the Blues wanted Owen Power and more as a part of that deal, and the Sabres did not want to make that move, didn't feel comfortable giving up that much. Whether that's true or not, only Jarmo Kekalainen and Doug Armstrong really know that. But this deal has kind of been on hold for the last, I don't even remember what time of day it broke. I think it was yesterday afternoon. So it's been on kind of pause for almost the last 24 hours. We don't know if this is legit. We don't know if Parayko is actually coming to Buffalo or if not. This could be all smoke. It definitely seems like the Thomas aspect of it, I think, is all just rumor. The Parayko part of it is, I think there's a lot of substance to that, and it seems like that's pretty definite. And the conversation is really just we're waiting to see if Colton Parayko will waive his no-trade clause and agree to come to Buffalo, or if he will decide to keep his no-trade clause intact and block the trade and stay in St. Louis. But as all of this is going on, about only probably 25 minutes ago, maybe a half hour ago, the Bills said, "Hold my beverage," to that, because the Buffalo Bills have supposedly landed a wide receiver. According to Adam Schefter, the Bills are working on a deal with the Chicago Bears to land wide receiver DJ Moore. So DJ Moore, a former first-round pick originally drafted by the Carolina Panthers in the first round in 2019, had some very productive early years in Carolina. He was traded to Chicago a few years ago and had put up some decent numbers, had a little bit of a down year last year after the Bears had drafted Romeo Dunze in the top 10. They took Luther Burden in the second round last year. They signed Devin Duvernay. So DJ Moore didn't, it was kind of the receiver role kind of became crowded. So DJ Moore is 28 years old. And, he has a fairly sizable contract. I would assume Chicago is probably eating some of this contract. The rumor is that the Bills are trading a mid-round pick for DJ Moore, which that's according to Ian Rappaport as well, that the Bills are trading a mid-round pick for DJ Moore. And honestly, my opinion on it, and I'll go more into it later, I think it's a fantastic deal for Buffalo. I think this is an excellent, excellent, excellent move, especially only giving up a mid-round pick for DJ Moore. I think that's absolutely phenomenal. And I think he will do very well with Josh Allen throwing to him. And I'm honestly really excited to see what he can do. But the Sabres, we've got to wait and see sort of what happens with Parayko. Again, later on in the show, going to talk all about the NHL trade deadline, where the Sabres are at. Sabres in Pittsburgh tonight against the Penguins at 7 o'clock. And then after tonight's game, there's only 20 games left on the Sabres schedule. The sprint to the finish is real. Sabres only 2 points back of the Tampa Bay Lightning for the Atlantic Division lead. And the last time the Sabres were even really in contention to win a division, they won the Northeast Division back in the 2009-2010 season before the divisions were realigned. So the Sabres have never won the Atlantic Division, but we'll see how all that shakes out. Before we go into that, as always, we'll talk a little bit about Fredonia Sports. And we got to start off with a team that is beginning their spring season red hot, and that is the women's lacrosse team. They are on a heater. A little bit of a close game yesterday down in Pennsylvania against Westminster. First 2 games of the season, they were at Allegheny last Wednesday and took home a 17-3 win. They scored the first 7 goals of this game. It was 10-2 at the half. Miley Barron scored 5 goals. Not to mention Jenna Slamka and Riley Bennett also added hat tricks in the game. Katie O'Brien had a 2-goal game too. And a 17-3 win is, needless to say, incredible. Absolutely insane. On Saturday, the home opener, the Blue Devils took on Alfred and again hammered the Saxons. A 14-4 win, a hat trick from Katie O'Brien. Fredonia led this game 9-1 at the half. It was just an avalanche of goal scoring, a dominant 2-0 start. Yesterday in Westminster, little bit of a closer game. 2 goals from Jenna Slamka, 2 goals from Katie O'Brien, who has 7 now through the Blue Devils' first 3 games, as Fredonia beat Westminster 9-7 to improve to 3-0 on the season. This is a team that finished right around the 500 mark last year. They snuck into the SUNYAC playoffs as a lower seed, matched up against an incredible New Paltz team, and lost big. This is a women's lacrosse team that is not only, like for this team, you're not just talking about sneaking into the SUNYAC playoffs. You're talking about going on a warpath and potentially being one of the favorites when we get to conference play. Now, obviously, there's a lot of time left in the lacrosse season. It literally just started. The regular season doesn't even end until the end of April, and that's before we even get to the playoffs. That being said, it's a great start for this women's lacrosse team. A team that is coming to an end but has had some great results, men's and women's indoor track. The SUNYAC championships were last weekend up in Brockport. Fredonia had 3 individual winners, as for the 4th straight time, women's pole vaulter Cara Pelleccia is your indoor SUNYAC champion in the pole vault. I made the claim the other day, and I still believe that it's legit. I think Cara Pelleccia is the greatest pole vaulter in Fredonia State history. I really think so. She never lost an indoor pole vault championship in the SUNYAC, ever. Never lost. She was 4 for 4 in the SUNYACs. And outdoor, she won, if I remember correctly, she is going for her 3rd straight in this outdoor season. I don't think she won it her freshman year. But even still, I mean, just it's been an unbelievable career for the senior Pelleccia. And she wasn't the only one who took home wins as well, as sophomore Jacob Futch took home the men's pole vault championship. So both take home SUNYAC titles and will advance to the NCAA regional championships in New York City this weekend. They will also be joined by freshman Yvonne Littlelow of the women's team. Again, a tremendous performance, a great showing at the SUNYAC Indoor Championships in Brockport last week. Littlelow specifically finished 3rd in the triple jump, and Yvonne Littlelow did qualify for the NCAA regionals. As far as the men's team, we already mentioned Jacob Futch taking home the win in the men's pole vault, and Cam Sample also taking the win in the indoor long jump. So Sample will also be going to the regional championships, as well as Talon Rowland finishing in 2nd place in the 400-meter dash in the indoor SUNYAC championships. So those championships taking place this weekend. They start tomorrow, and they'll run through Saturday at the Armory in New York City. And if, we'll see how things go, the indoor championships for Division III down in Birmingham, Alabama next weekend. The outdoor season begins on Friday, April 3rd and Saturday, April 4th with a 2-day meet at Geneseo for both the men's and women's teams. Other spring sports just getting started. Baseball is underway. They had a doubleheader at Westminster last Saturday. And some close games. The first game, an 8-7 loss in game 1 of that doubleheader, and then taking home and giving up in that 8-7 loss. It was a game that the Blue Devils actually had a 3-run lead going into the 7th inning. Again, with it being a doubleheader, they only play 7 innings per game. Going into the 7th inning, leading 7-4. Blue Devils were not able to hang on as Westminster came back and won it 8-7. But Fredonia did get the win in Game 2 of the doubleheader, a commanding 9-4 win over Westminster in Game 2. They were up at Hilbert yesterday and lost that game 13-4. Hilbert took a 3-0 lead in the first inning and pretty much never looked back. They also put 7 runs on the board so Hilbert put 3 on the board in the first. Fredonia tied it with 3 of their own in the second. Hilbert took the lead with 1 more in the bottom of the second, and they led the rest of the way. They put 7 runs on the board in the 8th. So the concern for baseball is, the late-in-game bullpen areas that new head coach Frank Jagoda is going to really look to tighten up for his team. They are 1-2 so far on the, again, very young season. They have a doubleheader this weekend at Allegheny College down in Meadville. Saturday, again, start time, not 100% sure. It's also dependent on the weather. Although Saturday, supposedly, I believe the weekend's supposed to be fairly nice. Temperature-wise, it's supposed to be fairly nice. I think we might get some rain, though. I'm actually not really sure. Yeah, Saturday's supposed to be like 63. Yeah, in Fredonia, Saturday has a high of 63. Of course, the weather could be different down in Meadville, but we'll see how that goes. That doubleheader is those are the last 2 games that baseball has before they head down to Florida for the Russ Matt Central Florida Invitational, their spring training. Regular season home opener Monday, March 23rd. They have a doubleheader against Hilbert that starts at 1 p.m. Softball, not quite started yet. Again, softball does not have the pre-spring training games, so they will start the season in Florida on Saturday, March 14th with 2 games. They take on Belhaven University at 12:15 that day, and Coe College at 2:30. Coe College, actually the alma mater of Bills Hall of Fame head coach Marv Levy and former running back Fred Jackson, both graduates of Coe College, a very, very small university, but a very academically high esteemed university as well. And then finally, as far as spring sports, women's tennis getting closer to their spring season. Again, they play most of their season in the fall, but they do play some matches in the spring. They have 2 at the end of March. They take on Geneva College on March 24th and St. Vincent College on March 29th before finishing out the spring season on April 18th at Brockport. So that is a look at your Fredonia sports. When we come back, I'll see if there's any updates to the Bills situation with DJ Moore. We're going to talk about the Bandits taking home 2 big wins last weekend. And then, of course, the NHL trade deadline on Saturday. Will Jarmo Kekalainen make any more moves before tomorrow's 4 p.m. deadline? Thanks for tuning in to Big Blue Sports this afternoon on WCVF 88.9, the campus and community voice of Fredonia. Back in a moment. And welcome back to Big Blue Sports here on WCVF 88.9, the campus and community voice of Fredonia. Again, don't have an official result. We don't have the official compensation for the DJ Moore trade. We do know, again, that it is a mid-round pick, but don't know exactly what the Bills are giving up to go get the 28-year-old receiver from the Chicago Bears. Hopefully we figure out at some point over the course of this show. Before we get there, I'm going to talk about the Buffalo Bandits. The Bandits, again, we talked last week about how the Bandits through the first 10 games had looked really sluggish. It's specifically since January. They started fine early in the season. I mean, they started 3-1. Didn't look great in their win over the Desert Dogs on January 3rd, but got the win. They were 3-1, and going into this past weekend, they had lost 5 out of 6, which included a loss on February 7th to the last place Philadelphia Wings and a beatdown loss in Colorado to the Mammoth on January 31st. So it had not looked great. Now, they got the win over Halifax on Valentine's Day, an 11-10 win. They were coming off a loss to Vancouver, a doubleheader this weekend. Friday night, the weekend started on Friday night with an NLL Finals rematch against the Saskatchewan Rush. Of course, the Bandits beat the Rush in the finals last year to win their 3rd straight championship. Saskatchewan has been phenomenal this year. They're led by some phenomenal scorers: Robert Church, Ryan Keenan, Zach Mann's obviously one of the top scorers in the league. Austin Shanks has been phenomenal. Matt Hossack is a very good player too. They have an excellent goaltender in Frank Giuliano too. The Rush were 10-1, sitting in first place in the entire league coming into the weekend. Bandits kind of were limping into the weekend at 4-6. And Buffalo got off to a really good start. Tehoka Nanticoke scored very early in the game, just 47 seconds into the game. Nanticoke gave Buffalo a 1-0 lead. Ian McKay added a power play goal just about a minute later. Bandits were up 2-0 early, and the arena was jumping. And it would get even more jumping when Kyle Buchanan, midway through the first quarter, later in the first quarter, would score to make it 3-0 Buffalo. Saskatchewan would answer back very quickly. Josh Zawada would put the Rush on the board to make it 3-1, but Clay Scanlon with a phenomenal goal put Buffalo ahead 4-1. Matt Hasek would pick one up later in the quarter, and then with just 2 seconds left in the quarter, Kyle Buchanan adds his second of the game. Bandits up 5-2 at the end of the first quarter, and we really had not seen this Buffalo offense look that good in a long time. The Bandits were kind of averaging, around the mark of, they were averaging around the mark of only, 9, 10 goals max, maybe 11 the last handful of games. And it looked like they were going to fly past that. Ian McKay scored the first goal of the second quarter to make it 6-2 Buffalo before Saskatchewan got back-to-back from Ryan Keenan, and then Zach Mann scored a power play goal to cut it to 6-4. Tehoka Nanticoke adds a power play. Ignore the voice crack. Tehoka Nanticoke adds a power play goal midway through the second quarter to put Buffalo up 7-4 before Ian McKay picks up the hat trick late in the quarter. Bandits lead 8-4 at the half, and everybody's feeling pretty good. Everybody's feeling good. The third quarter starts. Robert Church scores 32 seconds into the second half. It's 8-5. You're thinking, fine, whatever. Then Ryan Keenan scores a little bit over a minute later. Rush cut it to 8-6. But Ian McKay, once again, McKay, he scored 37 goals last year as a transition player, and then wasn't even a finalist for Transition Player of the Year. Thanks, NLL. McKay scores his fourth of the game. Bandits are up 9-6. Austin Shanks gets one a minute later to make it 9-7. And then with 2 minutes left in the third quarter, a transition goal from who else but Mr. Coast to Coast, the captain himself, Steve Priolo, to put Buffalo ahead 10-7 heading into the final 15 minutes. And then the Bandits offense just kind of died. And the Bandits offense just went totally ice cold. Ryan Keenan scored his third goal of the game early in the fourth to make it 10-8, which, you're thinking, all right, fine, whatever. We still got a 2-goal lead. Matt Vince was able to hold the Rush at bay, and the Bandits defense did a very good job of making Saskatchewan's shots look difficult. Buffalo not able to generate much of anything offensively. I'm yawning now because I guess didn't sleep enough last night, even though I slept great. So Saskatchewan pulls Frank Giuliano down 2, and Ryan Keenan scores with a minute and a half left to make it a 1-goal game. Now you're getting kind of nervous, but you're thinking, all right, it's all right. Vince just needs to hold down the fort. Rush get the ball. They pull Giuliano again, and Robert Church scores with 57 seconds left to tie the game. The Rush outscored the Bandits 3-0 in the fourth quarter. This has been a problem that we've seen this season, that Buffalo's offense in key moments in the game, it just goes so cold. And this was the case again. No goals in the entire fourth quarter. 10-10, we're going to overtime. Now, I've been to a couple of overtime games for the Bandits. A couple of years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, I was at their first round playoff game against Georgia when they went back and forth for what felt like forever before Buffalo eventually won. And then it happened again on Friday. They went back and forth forever. The entire arena was on the edge of their seats. We're all nervous. Every time the Rush have the ball and get a shot, Vince was incredible. And then finally, nearly 7 minutes into the overtime, who else but the one guy who normally throughout the course of his career you could count on to score a big goal. This year, he has struggled. It's been rough. But Josh Byrne finally comes through. Byrne gets the overtime winner with assists from Matt Spanger and Steve Priolo. The Bandits pull off the upset and win it 10-11. Byrne had a phenomenal game. Josh Byrne with the overtime goal. He also had 7 assists in the game for 8 points, 12 shots on goal. Ian McKay, of course, scoring 4 goals, 4 points from Tehoka Nanticoke. The Bandits really, really needed that as Nanticoke picked up 2 goals and 2 assists. 4 assists from Dane Smith. No goals for Smith, though, which is a bit odd. For the Rush, Robert Church with a 6-point game, 2 goals and 4 assists. 4 goals from Ryan Keenan. He also added an assist. Zach Mans, a goal and 4 assists. 2-point games from Austin Shanks and Mike Messenger as well. Overall, Connor Farrell got bodied on faceoffs by Jake Nasso. But overall, I thought Matt Vince played a remarkable game. I thought he looked like he was in prime form. And that's what the Bandits need. I mean, Vince is 43 years old. He's going to be 44 in June. His overall season numbers are not all that great. But he looked excellent on Friday. Saturday, the Bandits head up north to face the Toronto Rock. Sometimes on a back-to-back, the second half of the back-to-back, especially if you're going on the road for that second game, it can be really tough. But the Bandits rose to the challenge. It was a very even game in the first quarter. 2 goals from Mark Matthews. As this game, it went back and forth. It was 1-0 Toronto. Then Buffalo tied it. Then Mitch DeSnew scored to put Buffalo up 2-1. Then Toronto tied it. Then Toronto took the lead. Then Buffalo tied it. So it was a 3-3 game going into the second quarter. Chris Boucher scores to give the Rock a 4-3 lead. And then Dane Smith decided to take over. In a span of about 3.5 minutes, Dane Smith scores 3 straight goals. Apparently wasn't happy with the fact that he didn't score at all on Friday. Decided to go on an absolute tear. Pick up 3 in a row. Buffalo up 6-4. A penalty shot goal from Challen Rogers at the end of the first half closed the gap. Buffalo leading 6-5 at halftime. Chris Boucher scored a minute into the third quarter to tie it for Toronto. Kyle Buchanan put Buffalo ahead 7-6. Mark Matthews with his third goal of the game tied it at 7. Ryan Benesh on the power play put Buffalo back in front. And hello, Josh Byrne scoring again. Byrne getting one late in the third. Bandits up 9-7. The fourth quarter, Buffalo was dominant. Less than a minute into the fourth quarter, Josh Byrne scores his second of the game to put the Bandits up 10-7. Mark Matthews cuts the deficit to 2. And then the Bandits' defense and transition teams decide to get in on the scoring as Matt Spanger scores to put the Bandits back up by 3. Byrne gets the hat trick to put the Bandits up 12-8. Less than a minute after that, Nick Weiss scores, and it's 13-8 Buffalo. Toronto would get a power play goal to make it 13-9, but with 15 seconds left on the power play and with the netminder with the goaltender pulled, Nick Weiss gets his second goal of the game. The Bandits beat the Rock 14-9, and they improved to 6-6 on the season. Again, another game where Matt Vince plays very well for Buffalo, and the Bandits have put themselves right back in the playoff conversation. There was a while where it was looking scary for the Bandits. They were 4-6. They were sitting at, I think, 11th in the league. Now they're in 7th. They're half a game behind Toronto, who they just beat. The Bandits are off this weekend, not to mention the Rush have lost back-to-back. Bandits are off this weekend as they're back in action next weekend. Yeah, they're off this weekend. They will host Colorado next Friday night in Honky Tonk Night, which is going to be awesome and so much fun. But we'll see, we'll see where things go from here. The Bandits have 6 games left in the regular season. And you've got to think that, if they were to play 500 lacrosse the rest of the way, they finish at 9-9. That puts you maybe in the playoffs, maybe not. So you got to think that the Bandits are probably going to have to win. I think if you can win 4 out of 6, you're feeling better about it. if you can win 4 out of 6, you feel better about it. But we'll see how things go. The remaining schedule for Buffalo is they are home against Colorado on Friday, at San Diego on March 21st, at Saskatchewan on the 28th, home against Vancouver April 4th, home against Rochester for the regular season home finale on April 11th. They end the season in Oshawa on April 18th against the Firewolves. That is all for your Bandits update. We're going to go to a short break. Before we do, we did just get the full trade details for the DJ Moore trade. The Bills are trading their second round pick in this year's draft to the Bears. They are getting in return DJ Moore and the Bears' 5th round pick. So it is a second rounder for DJ Moore and a 5th rounder. Pretty solid deal for Buffalo. We know that, they've done well drafting in the late rounds. So, giving up a second round pick is maybe a little bit pricey, but you do get that 5th round pick back. So not a bad deal from Brandon Beane, and the Bills do get their wide receiver. Going to take a short break, and when I come back, it's going to be all about the Bills, or all about the Sabres, rather, trade deadline as Buffalo looks to shore up their roster for a potential playoff run. It's exciting to talk about a potential playoff run because that hasn't happened in how long? 15 years. It's been incredibly long. Thanks for tuning in to Big Blue Sports this afternoon on WCVF 88.9, the campus and community voice of Fredonia. Back in a few. And welcome back to Big Blue Sports here on WCVF 88.9, the campus and community voice of Fredonia. So the NHL trade deadline is tomorrow at 4 p.m. The Sabres are in a position to not only be buyers, but like actually buyers, like legit buyers, like not what they were a couple of years ago when they were like maybe in a wild card spot and Kevin Adams traded for Riley Stillman and called that good enough, and then we missed the playoffs by 1 point. This is a team that genuinely, and again, I think a lot of Sabres fans like myself have really tried to approach this team and their successes with as much caution as possible, because it's kind of in our nature to assume the worst for the Sabres, because that's what we've been presented with for the last handful of years. We've been trained to assume that the bottom is going to fall out, that the other shoe is going to drop. And I think it's scary to fully believe again, especially because we've been burned how many times as Sabres fans. This is different. This is the best spot this team has been in more than a decade and a half. They're in a better spot now than they were in the last time they made the playoffs. The last time they made the playoffs, it came down to the final game of the regular season, a game against the Flyers in Buffalo that they won in overtime, where they needed to get a point in that game. This is a situation where you might be looking at later down the line, you might be looking at a case where you've got 4 games left and your playoff spot is locked up and you're just playing for seeding. Imagine that in Buffalo. The Sabres win over Vegas on Tuesday night was incredible. Incredible. Just to see the excitement of the fans, to see a packed arena in Buffalo with thousands of people waving their rally towels, and to see the hope. Listen, it's been a long time since we've had it, but I'll tell you, Buffalo is nuts when the Sabres are good. It's something that I don't have the strongest memories of, because The last time they were in the playoffs was 2011. I was 7 years old. I was in first grade the last time the Sabres made the playoffs. I'm now a senior in college. I turned 22 in May. I don't remember the playoffs that well. I do a little bit, but I don't remember the Sabres being in the playoffs all that well. This is an opportunity this year. You're not just talking about making the playoffs as the Sabres either. This is a team that the way they've played the last couple of months, I think this is a team that could go into the playoffs and maybe win a round or 2 rounds. Am I saying they're going to go win the Stanley Cup? No, I don't think so. Is it possible? Yes. Do I think so? No, but they'll. I think they could get there, maybe. So you look at if you've never looked at the TSN trade bait list, I highly recommend that you do that because so TSN, of course, is Canadian ESPN, and their trade deadline coverage is the best. It's better than anybody else's. ESPN's is but TSN's is really good. There's a reason that NHL Network picks up TSN Trade Center every year on deadline day. So TSN has a thing that they release. It's called the Trade Bait Board. It's their list of players who they think could be on the move. Some of the top names on the list, Vinny Trocheck for the Rangers, Nazem Kadri for the Flames, obviously Robert Thomas for St. Louis, Blake Coleman for Calgary, Colton Parayko for St. Louis. Again, you start to see trends. Teams that are struggling are probably going to look to trade a lot of veteran players. You look at St. Louis for, with Robert Thomas, Colton Parayko, Justin Falk is on that list. Braden Shen is on that list. Jordan Binnington is on that list, although he's a lot lower down the list. For the Rangers, obviously Vincent Trocheck is potentially on the list. For Calgary, Nazem Kadri, Blake Coleman, Zach Whitecloud, some of their veteran guys. Vancouver could have, Connor Garland on the list, Evander Kane on the list. All those sorts of guys. So, and there are some rebuilding teams on the list. But this is the first time I think ever that I've looked at a TSN trade bait list and not seen a single Buffalo Sabre on there. I don't think I've ever looked at a trade bait list and not seen a Buffalo Sabre on there because the Sabres seem to be always rebuilding. Now, what is the possibility that some of these players get traded? Some of the younger guys, I don't think will. For example, I don't think Robert Thomas gets traded at the deadline unless it's something crazy. I really want the Sabres to get him, but I don't think it happens unless there's something crazy given to him. Other veteran players, I think, are pretty much a lock. I think Trocheck is definitely getting traded. The Rangers are kind of in a tailspin, and I think Chris Drury loses his job at the end of the year. Calgary, I would not be surprised at all to see them trade Kadri and Coleman. St. Louis, obviously, we know, the conversations with Parayko. I think Justin Falk is probably gone too. Rasmus Ristolainen, old friend, is on there. The Flyers, good chance that the Flyers will trade him. And a lot of these guys you'll notice are on one-year deals. A lot of times at the deadline, deals are made for guys who will be rentals. So Blake Cole, they actually, surprisingly, a handful of the top players are under contract for next year. But only for next year. Like Blake Coleman, his contract expires the end of next season. Same with Rasmus Ristolainen and Justin Falk. Some other guys on there as well. Guys who are unrestricted free agents at the end of the year, Bobby McMahon for Toronto, Evander Kane for Vancouver, and, some other players are RFAs. I'm going to interrupt this discussion right now because it just came across my screen. According to Elliot Friedman of TSN, very well-respected hockey insider, Colton Parayko has declined to waive his no-trade clause for a deal between the Blues and Sabres. That that just came across my screen just a second ago. So the deal for Colton Parayko is not happening. Parayko is not coming to Buffalo. That's big. So the Sabres, what was going to be the first big trade of the Jarmo Kekalainen era, is not going to happen. Parayko is staying put. Now, whether this is a conversation of he wanted to stay put in St. Louis or he just didn't want to come to Buffalo, I think now, this year, you can safely assume that he declined that because he wants to stay in St. Louis. In years past, players would decline to waive their no-trade clause because they didn't want to come to Buffalo. Buffalo is playing so well right now, though, that you have to assume it's probably because he doesn't want to leave St. Louis, which, to a certain degree, you can understand, right? I mean, he's within his rights to do that. If you've, built a life, you've got a family in St. Louis, you don't want to give that up. And I'll tell you what. St. Louis is a darn cool city. Big fan of it. So Parayko's not coming to Buffalo. Robert Thomas supposedly not coming to Buffalo. Where do you pivot now if you are Jarmo Kekalainen? Where do you look to see who else you're going to take? Who else are you going to get? It's interesting that I'm honestly surprised. I'm a little surprised, although I had been hearing that it was likely that he was going to decline it. So what does Jarmo Kekalainen do now? He's going to do something else. This team is in too good of a position to essentially sit on your hands. Kekalainen he's not just going to do nothing. I would be really surprised if he just went out and did absolutely nothing. So be on the lookout for what Kekalainen is going to do now that Colton Parayko is not coming to Buffalo. If you're looking to add other defensemen, do the Blues say, well, we're not going to give you Colton Parayko, but we give you Justin Falk potentially? I certainly wouldn't give up for Falk what I gave up for Parayko, I don't think. The rumor was that the Sabres were going to give up their first round pick and Radim Murka. I think there's other defensemen who you look at and you sort of think, okay, who are some other players who we could potentially look at? Maybe that's somebody like Zach Whitecloud from Calgary. Maybe that's somebody like, maybe Luke Shen or Logan Stanley from Winnipeg, potentially. Maybe you look at Dougie Hamilton from New Jersey if they're willing to eat a lot of that salary. Maybe Andrew Peeke from Boston. Although I don't think Boston would trade him to a division rival. Absolutely not. You kind of go into a conversation of, all right, now what? Now what do you do now that Parayko has said no to that deal? Do you continue to try and press for Robert Thomas? Do you maybe say, all right, you try to trade for Thomas and Parayko. Parayko says no. Well, is there a package that works for Thomas? I would assume that's probably not going to happen just because the Sabres already, tried to go get Thomas and the Blues said, no, we want Owen Power plus. I would think probably Power, Murka, and maybe multiple first-round picks, which is an asking price that's higher than what Jarmo Kekalainen is comfortable with. But we'll see. And overall, we know that Colton Parayko is not coming to the Buffalo Sabres. Again, the trade deadline is tomorrow at 4 p.m., so stay tuned to whether you want to, ESPN or NFL Network or NFL Network, NHL Network, what have you. And there goes the headline from TSN is Parayko says no to Buffalo, which I don't even know necessarily that it's Parayko saying no to Buffalo. I think it's more so that Parayko is saying no to being traded because he loves St. Louis. But an interesting little wrinkle to this trade deadline, and the question remains, where does Jarmo Kekalainen go from here? Where do the Sabres pivot to see who they could potentially land at the deadline tomorrow? Well, before we wrap up here on Big Blue Sports, I wanted to let everybody know, everybody involved in the radio station, that we are having a workshop. If you've ever wanted to create a liner or sweeper, that's one of those things that plays, it's a 13 to 15 second little thing that tells you what station you're listening to. Well, you know what? Let's play one now. And I know the pitch that we've used is asking if they've wanted to create something like this. So I'll play an example for you of a liner and then tell you all about our liner workshop.
Your call has been forwarded to an automatic voice message system. At the tone, please record your message.
Hey, I'm just calling to let you know that you're listening to WCVF 88.9 The Voice.
So that's an example of a liner, also sometimes known as they're kind of, liner and sweeper are kind of interchangeable. Sweeper usually has to do with, it's in the middle of music blocks, where liners, kind of played otherwise. So if you've ever wanted to make something that sounds like that, by the way, shout out my wonderful girlfriend, Chloe Kowalik, who made that liner. If you've ever wanted to make one of your own, Fredonia Radio Systems is hosting a liner workshop this Saturday at 6 p.m. We meet right here in the station, McEwen Hall 115. There is a form that you can sign up for. If you are interested and did not receive the form, go ahead and email frs@fredonia.edu. We'll make sure to reach out to you. Pop by for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be really cool. One of the many things that we're doing to try and, teach some radio skills to those who are going to be here when those of us who are seniors and older students graduate, because that includes me for some crazy reason. So that is all for Big Blue Sports today. I want to thank everybody for tuning into the show, as well as everybody here at FRS who makes this show possible. Again, trade deadline tomorrow at 4, so we'll see where the Sabres go from there. Thanks for listening to Big Blue Sports this afternoon. Local at 1 is next. You're listening to WCVF, the campus and community voice of Fredonia. We'll catch you next week.